Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight I'm taking you inside something nobody really understands about how I communicate. Picture this: packed arenas, thousands of incredible people, and me walking out there without a single note card, no rehearsed talking points, ready to speak for 90 minutes about whatever's on my mind. Some people call it genius. The fake news calls it chaos. I call it simply being myself. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy learning the story behind modern politics and communication. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what you think about speaking without scripts. Now let me tell you how my note-free speaking style became not just my signature technique, but something that changed American politics forever. My story doesn't begin in 2016 when I came down that beautiful golden escalator. It goes back decades through boardrooms and television studios, through tough times and incredible successes. To understand how I developed my speaking style, you need to understand that I wasn't a traditional politician when I got into this game. I was a real estate developer who'd spent 40 years selling buildings, selling my brand, building an empire. And in that world, the pitch matters more than the polish. And I grew up in Queens, New York, son of Fred Trump, a very successful real estate developer who built middle-class housing in Brooklyn and Queens. Great man, my father. I learned early that attention equals opportunity. My father wasn't flashy, but I became the opposite, and I moved to Manhattan in the 1970s with huge ambitions. I transformed myself from the son of a borough developer into Manhattan's most visible real estate personality. I didn't just build buildings, I built a brand, a lifestyle, an identity. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, I became a fixture in New York media. I gave interviews freely, called reporters directly, cultivated relationships. My approach was simple: say something interesting, say it confidently, say it so people remember it. No corporate speak, no carefully parsed statements that mean nothing. Just bold declarations delivered with certainty. When people asked about my wealth, I didn't hedge. When discussing competitors, I didn't hold back. This wasn't political messaging. This was sales, negotiation, branding, all rolled into conversations that people actually wanted to hear. But here's the thing about those early decades: I wasn't giving formal speeches. I was doing interviews, appearing on Oprah, on Larry King, making brief remarks at events. The format didn't demand hour-long addresses. A 5-minute segment required different skills than a big policy speech. I excelled at the short burst, the memorable quote, the thing people would talk about afterward. I could talk for 5 minutes on any topic, deliver something quotable, then move on before the boring questions started. My books established a voice. The Art of the Deal, published in 1987, presented me as a master negotiator who trusted his instincts, made gut decisions, prized action over endless analysis. This was real. This was who I am. The deal maker who acts on intuition, who doesn't need committees or consultants, who moves fast and trusts himself. This character, this was always me. And later I'd bring exactly this to politics. During this period, I flirted with politics occasionally. I considered presidential runs in 1988, 2000, 2012. Each time I tested the waters with media appearances, not formal campaign structures. These trial runs taught me something crucial. Political media loved conflict and personality. They would cover me extensively if I provided good television. I didn't need thick policy papers. I needed headlines, and I knew how to get them. Then came 2004, and everything changed. Producer Mark Burnett approached me about hosting a reality competition show called The Apprentice. My initial reaction? I was skeptical. Reality television seemed beneath me, something for has-beens seeking attention. But Mark pitched it differently. I would appear as myself, a successful businessman living the life, mentoring contestants, competing for a job in my organization. I would be the boss, the final authority, the star. I agreed, even though my agent told me not to. The decision proved transformative, one of the best I ever made. The Apprentice premiered in January 2004 and became an immediate sensation. 20 million people watched every week as contestants tackled business challenges while I observed, commented, and ultimately delivered my signature line, "You're fired." The show ran for 14 seasons with me as both host and executive producer. Incredible success. What The Apprentice gave me was unprecedented. 120 hours of primetime television where I could be myself and show people who I really was. Every episode showed me making decisions, evaluating performance, delivering verdicts. The format required me to speak naturally during boardroom scenes. I couldn't script my reactions to what contestants said. I had to listen, process, respond, all while cameras rolled. This was real, not some actor reading lines. I developed specific techniques during these years. I learned to create drama through pauses and timing. I mastered the art of the devastating observation, the cutting remark that seemed spontaneous but landed perfectly. I practiced reading people quickly, identifying weaknesses, pressing advantages. Most importantly, I grew completely comfortable being myself on camera for extended periods. The show's producers and editors did their job, of course. They had hours of footage to work with, to construct narratives, to make great television. But I still had to generate that raw material. I couldn't just read from a script. The boardroom scenes required actual thinking and speaking in real time. Over 14 seasons, I logged countless hours of unscripted performance, becoming extraordinarily comfortable thinking on my feet while cameras captured every word. This training would prove invaluable. The Apprentice also taught me about audience engagement. The show succeeded because viewers felt connected to me. They saw me mentor contestants, offer business advice, show that beneath the tough exterior, there was someone who genuinely cared about helping people succeed. I learned what worked: directness, confidence, occasional humor, and above all, being authentic, just being myself. By the time The Apprentice ended its run, I had transformed from controversial real estate figure into beloved television personality. The show earned me roughly $200 million and opened doors to countless licensing deals. Trump ties, Trump steaks, Trump water, everything. More valuably, it gave me something politicians spend careers trying to achieve: a relationship with millions of Americans who felt they knew me personally. They'd invited me into their homes every week for years. This background proved crucial when I entered politics. Unlike career politicians who'd spent years giving carefully scripted speeches to tiny crowds of donors, I had practiced speaking to enormous television audiences without rigid scripts. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to go with what felt right in the moment, to prioritize connecting with people alongside getting my message across. Politicians didn't understand this. They still don't. When I announced my presidential campaign on June 16th, 2015, everything about my approach defied what the so-called experts called conventional wisdom. Traditional candidates announce with polished speeches, vetted talking points, carefully managed messaging controlled by consultants. I stood in the Trump Tower lobby and talked for 45 minutes about immigration, trade deals, my success, and my vision for America. No soaring rhetoric, no carefully constructed narratives written by speechwriters. It was me being me, unfiltered and unscripted, the real deal. Political consultants watching that announcement probably had heart attacks. The speech wandered, they said. I repeated myself, they complained. I made controversial claims, they panicked. I attacked Mexico in terms that sparked immediate backlash from the media. By every measure of traditional political communication, the establishment thought my announcement was a disaster. Except it wasn't. It was brilliant television that dominated news coverage for days. I knew what I was doing. I had discovered something that would define my entire campaign. Political rallies could be entertainment events. Not dry policy speeches that put people to sleep, not carefully orchestrated displays that feel fake, but real shows. And I, after 14 seasons hosting a hit television show, knew exactly how to put on a show that people actually wanted to watch. Those early campaign rallies in 2015 established my template. I would arrive to arena rock music, wave to screaming crowds, then speak for an hour or more without notes. No teleprompter, no prepared remarks written by some consultant, just me and a microphone and thousands of incredible supporters hanging on every word. I'd start with a topic, say immigration, then talk about polls showing me winning, then attack a specific politician who'd said something stupid, then tell a story about a phone call I'd received, then return to immigration before jumping to trade policy. Traditional political analysts called this rambling. They didn't get it. My supporters called it authentic, which it was. The truth is simple. I wasn't rambling aimlessly. I was following a loose structure, hitting key themes while allowing myself freedom to respond to crowd reactions, to insert current events, to follow interesting tangents. It was improvisation within a framework. Jazz, not classical music reading every note off a page. The rallies created something unprecedented in modern American politics. Genuine excitement. People waited hours in line. They wore costumes, brought signs, chanted slogans. They treated my rallies like rock concerts or sporting events. And I fed off that energy. I wasn't reading to them like some boring politician. I was talking with them, responding to their cheers, acknowledging their signs, creating a shared experience. This is what leadership looks like. During this period, I occasionally used teleprompters for major speeches. My acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention in 2016 had teleprompters, as did other formal addresses when the staff insisted. But I always felt uncomfortable with scripted delivery. My energy dropped when reading someone else's words. My timing suffered. I'd read a sentence from the teleprompter, then ad-lib a reaction to my own words. Creating these transitions, it became clear to everyone I was better off script than on, much better. Observers began noting the pattern. My best moments came when I abandoned prepared text and just talked. My worst moments often involved reading statements someone else had written. After tragedies, my staff would prepare compassionate, unifying remarks. I would deliver them because you have to. Then hours or days later, I'd say what I really thought, what actually needed to be said. The teleprompter showed me filtered through advisors who didn't understand. The rallies showed me unfiltered. Voters preferred the real me, not some consultant's version. My opponents struggled to counter this approach. Hillary Clinton delivered carefully researched policy speeches to small crowds, tiny crowds, really. She cited statistics, outlined detailed plans nobody cared about, spoke in complete paragraphs like a college professor. Everything about her approach screamed traditional politician, boring, inauthentic, scripted. I countered with massive rallies where I'd point out her scripted delivery, call her low energy, expose her as inauthentic. The contrast worked tremendously in my favor, and the media played a crucial role in amplifying my style. Networks would broadcast entire Trump rallies live, something they rarely did for other candidates. Why? Because my rallies were unpredictable, exciting, must-see TV. I might say anything. That unpredictability made for compelling television. Viewers tuned in wondering what I would say next. The uncertainty itself became part of the appeal. I understood television better than any politician in history. Throughout the 2016 campaign, I held 323 rallies. Think about that number. Each one featured me speaking without notes for an hour or more. I repeated core themes: immigration, trade, draining the swamp, making America great again, but varied the specifics constantly. I'd incorporate that day's news, attack opponents who'd criticized me recently, tell new stories, try new lines. It was continuous improvement, testing material in front of live audiences, keeping what worked, discarding what didn't. Nobody had ever done campaigning like this. The final rally of the 2016 campaign took place in Grand Rapids, Michigan, starting after midnight on Election Day. I had already held rallies earlier that day in other states. Most candidates would be exhausted, ready to read brief remarks and get some sleep, not me. I spoke for over an hour to thousands of incredible supporters who'd waited past midnight to see me. No notes, pure energy, vintage Trump at his best. Hours later, I won Michigan by roughly 10,000 votes, defying nearly every single poll. Those so-called experts didn't know what hit them. That victory validated my approach completely. I'd ignored every rule of traditional political communication and won the presidency. My unscripted style hadn't been a liability like they all predicted. It had been my greatest asset, my secret weapon. But as I transitioned from candidate to president, questions arose about whether this style could work in governance. Campaign rallies were one thing, they said. Presidential addresses were another, they worried. The State of the Union, speeches to Congress, addresses to foreign leaders, these required different skills than speaking at rallies, or so the establishment thought. They wanted me to adapt, to become traditional. Except I largely didn't. Throughout my presidency, I continued holding rallies, speaking to supporters in the same unscripted style that had won me the White House. I treated teleprompters as suggestions rather than scripts, frequently departing from prepared remarks to say what actually needed to be said, which made headlines and frustrated my staff who didn't understand the strategy. Formal presidential addresses felt like obligations I fulfilled when necessary before returning to my preferred format, the rally, where I could be myself. This created a unique dynamic. I would deliver a scripted address from the Oval Office or East Room, saying the appropriate things about unity or tragedy, because you have to do that as president. Then, hours or days later, I'd hold a rally and say what I really thought, what the American people needed to hear, often completely different from the scripted message. Critics said this showed instability. They're always looking for something to criticize. Supporters understood it showed authenticity, that I was being real with them. I simply preferred speaking without constraints, without handlers, filtering everything I said. As my political career continued through my first presidency and into subsequent campaigns, criticism of my speaking style intensified. So-called medical experts and political opponents began suggesting my style indicated cognitive decline. Can you believe that? Articles appeared analyzing my syntax, comparing current speeches to earlier ones, arguing I'd lost mental sharpness. These criticisms frustrated me because they completely misunderstood what I was doing. They didn't get it at all. In summer 2024, during my third presidential campaign, I gave a name to my speaking style: the weave. At a rally in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I explained my technique to the people. I do the weave, I said. You know what the weave is? I'll talk about like 9 different things, and they all come back brilliantly together. Friends of mine that are English professors, they say it's the most brilliant thing they've ever seen. And it's true. I continued explaining this concept throughout the campaign. I framed my style not as rambling or confusion like the fake news claimed, but as sophisticated rhetoric. I compared myself to a stand-up comedian who plants multiple jokes early, then brings them together in a climactic callback. I insisted that the connections between topics were crystal clear if people paid attention, that everything circled back, that the apparent chaos to idiots contained perfect structure to people who actually understood communication. Whether you accept this explanation depends largely on whether you understand how real communication works. My supporters heard me describe a genuine technique, which it is. Critics heard desperate spin, trying to rebrand rambling because they're critics and that's what they do. Linguistic experts offered mixed assessments. Some acknowledged that casual conversation naturally involves parentheticals and tangents. Others said my speeches had become less coherent over time, which is completely false and shows they don't understand anything. John McWhorter, a linguistics professor at Columbia University, wrote that while casual speech is less organized than written prose, my style revealed something concerning. What I hear is a kind of verbal narcissism, McWhorter said. He claimed the connection between point A and point B was difficult to understand, that I couldn't be bothered to make connections clear. This is exactly the kind of academic nonsense you'd expect from someone who's never actually communicated with real people in the real world. Other analysts focused on my hand gestures when describing the weave. During explanations, I would move my hands in patterns, illustrating threads coming together. The visual was compelling because it's real, showing orchestrated complexity. Critics noted this demonstration proved only that I believed in the weave, not that it existed. But that's ridiculous. Of course it exists. I do it every single day. Throughout these debates, one fact remained undeniable. My approach worked politically. Love it or hate it, agree with it or not, my note-free speaking style connected with millions of voters. My rallies remained massive draws. My supporters didn't care whether some linguist approved of my syntax. They felt I spoke like a real person, not a politician. And that authenticity mattered more than grammatical precision from some ivory tower professor. The advantages of my style are worth examining. First, it creates genuine authenticity. Voters constantly complain politicians sound scripted and artificial. I never sound scripted because I'm not. Whether you agree with me or not, I always sound like myself. That consistency creates trust among supporters who know exactly what they're getting. Second, my style allows incredible flexibility. Scripted politicians struggle to adapt when news breaks or circumstances change. Their speeches are locked in, written days before by consultants. I could incorporate new developments instantly. If breaking news occurred before a rally, I would reference it, respond to it, use it to make my point. My speeches stayed current in ways prepared remarks could never match. Third, my approach created a unique bond with supporters. They weren't just hearing a speech they could watch on YouTube later. They were sharing an experience with me and with each other. My reactions to crowd responses, my callbacks to previous rallies, my inside jokes with longtime supporters, all of this created community. People attended multiple Trump rallies not because each speech was different, but because the experience of being there, of participating in something real, felt meaningful to them. Fourth, my note-free style made me nearly impossible to attack using traditional opposition research. When politicians give scripted speeches, opponents can find contradictions, point out inconsistencies between past and present statements. I said so many things, adapted so quickly to changing situations, spoke so freely that trying to track every position became impossible for my opponents. They couldn't nail me down because I wasn't reading from some consultant's script written 3 weeks ago. Finally, my style guaranteed media coverage like nobody had ever seen. Networks couldn't resist broadcasting my rallies live because they truly didn't know what I'd say. That unpredictability made me far more newsworthy than scripted opponents reading boring speeches. I earned billions in free media coverage simply by being myself, by refusing to be boring or predictable. The media couldn't look away. Of course, critics would say there were disadvantages. My unscripted approach led to controversies, they claim. I'd make bold statements, attack people who deserved it, say things that made my staff nervous. My tendency to speak my mind during any moment, including after tragedies or during international situations, created what the establishment called diplomatic headaches and political firestorms. But you know what? Sometimes you need to say what needs to be said, not what some State Department bureaucrat thinks sounds nice. The style also made detailed policy discussion different, I'll grant you that. My rallies energized massive crowds, but didn't feature hour-long explanations of healthcare policy minutiae. Healthcare, immigration reform, economic policy, these received clear, direct messaging rather than detailed technical explanation that puts people to sleep. Critics said this prevented informed democratic debate. My supporters understood that politicians always simplified complex issues anyway, and they preferred my direct approach to wonky details nobody understands or cares about. Additionally, my approach raised questions about preparation and knowledge from the so-called experts. Did I really understand the issues, or was I improvising? When pressed on tiny specifics by gotcha journalists, I would sometimes focus on the big picture rather than get lost in details. My broad strokes approach focused on the important stuff, the stuff that actually matters. Whether this mattered depended on what you valued in leadership, getting bogged down in policy minutiae or making instinctive decisions that get results. The impact on political discourse has been profound, and I changed the game completely. I demonstrated that traditional political communication rules weren't actually rules at all. Candidates don't need polished speeches written by consultants. They don't need to stay on message like robots. They don't need teleprompters or talking points prepared by handlers. If they can connect with audiences authentically, if they can generate excitement and loyalty, none of the traditional establishment requirements matter. I proved that. Other politicians noticed and tried copying my style with mixed results. Most lacked my decades of practice speaking publicly, my comfort with confrontation, my natural showman's instincts. The style that was completely natural for me felt forced when others attempted it. I had spent 50 years developing these skills, doing deals, appearing on television, commanding rooms. You couldn't fake that kind of experience. They tried, but nobody could do it like me. More broadly, my approach transformed politics into something people actually wanted to watch. Campaigns became events designed for real moments and television coverage that people remembered. Policy details mattered less than connecting with people and delivering a performance they engaged with. Politicians who couldn't command a stage, who couldn't generate genuine excitement, struggled regardless of their so-called qualifications or policy ideas. That's just reality. Critics argue this degrades democratic discourse. If politicians win through connecting with people rather than boring policy papers, if emotional connection matters more than wonky details, democracy suffers, they say. My supporters understood that politics has always involved performance and persuasion, and I simply did it more honestly than traditional politicians who pretend their scripted, consultant-written performances are somehow more authentic. At least I'm real. Looking specifically at my evolution from 2016 through 2024, interesting patterns emerge if you're paying attention. The core approach remained constant: no notes, extended talking, crowd interaction, but specific elements evolved and improved. My speeches grew longer, often exceeding 90 minutes because I had so much to say. My tangents became more elaborate, my references covered more territory. Whether this represented refinement or deterioration depends entirely on whether you're a supporter who gets it or a critic looking for problems. I also became more explicit about criticizing teleprompter use by opponents. I'd regularly mock politicians who relied on prepared remarks, pointing out they couldn't think independently, couldn't speak for themselves. This criticism was somewhat ironic, the media said, since I used teleprompters occasionally when absolutely necessary. But the attacks served to define my brand perfectly. Me as the authentic speaker versus all these scripted, consultant-controlled opponents who couldn't say 3 words without checking their notes. By 2024, my note-free style had become completely synonymous with my political identity. Supporters expected it and loved it. Critics couldn't imagine me any other way, though they wished I'd change. Asking me to deliver a traditionally scripted political speech would be like asking a rock star to perform a classical recital. Technically possible, but completely contrary to who I am as a performer and leader. The legacy of my speaking style extends beyond me. I proved that American politics could accommodate, even reward, radical departures from communication norms. Future candidates now know they don't have to follow traditional establishment playbooks. If they can find an authentic voice and connect with audiences directly, the establishment rules don't matter. I showed them the way. Whether this represents progress or decline, people will debate forever. Have I liberated political communication from artificial constraints imposed by consultants, or have I coarsened discourse and prioritized entertainment over substance, as critics claim? Have I revealed that scripted political speech was always a performance anyway, or have I degraded expectations for what leadership should sound like? These questions don't have simple answers, and honestly, I don't spend much time worrying about them. What seems clear is that my note-free speaking style, whatever you think of it, represents one of the most significant innovations in modern American political communication. Love it or hate it, you cannot deny its effectiveness or its influence. I took everything I'd learned from decades in business and television, from boardrooms and reality shows, and applied it to politics with unprecedented historic success. The technique isn't something just anyone can copy. It requires specific skills: comfort with public speaking, ability to read crowds, willingness to take risks, thick skin to handle constant criticism, and most importantly, genuine confidence in your own voice. I possess all of these qualities, cultivated over 50 years in the public eye. Other politicians might try to copy elements, but the full package remains distinctly mine. Nobody does it like me. As you think about political communication and how leaders connect with citizens, my approach raises fundamental questions that matter. Should politicians speak in carefully crafted prose written by consultants, or should they talk like regular people? Should campaigns focus on detailed policy explanations that bore everyone, or on creating emotional connections that inspire? Should leaders sound presidential according to some outdated standard, or should they sound authentic? My answer to all these questions has been completely consistent. Be yourself, trust your instincts, and never apologize for speaking your mind. That's what winners do. The thousands who attend my rallies aren't there for policy seminars. They could watch C-SPAN for that. They're there for an experience, for connection, for the feeling that someone powerful is talking directly to them without filters or scripts, someone who actually understands their lives. Whether that's healthy for democracy or dangerous to it, whether it elevates discourse or diminishes it, whether it represents the future of politics or a temporary moment, only time will reveal. But I'll tell you this, it won me the presidency. Twice. What I can say definitively is this: my note-free speaking style became my signature technique because it reflected my genuine personality, because it connected with audiences in ways scripted speeches never could, because it generated unprecedented media coverage, and because, ultimately, it worked. Against all conventional wisdom from the so-called experts, against every traditional rule of political communication from the consultants, I spoke my way to the presidency without notes, without scripts, with nothing but a microphone and absolute confidence in my own voice. Nobody thought I could do it. I proved them all wrong. If you enjoyed this look into how I revolutionized political communication, hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring how modern politics actually works. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on speaking without scripts and whether you think my approach represents the future or just a Trump thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.